Hey guys, I'm Edward, and I'm here to make a refutation on Robbie Gamble's claim of fact speech. His main claim was that the initiative and proposition system causes gridlock in California and undermines the California political systems. His supporting claims were that 1, the initiative system limits the state legislature from passing solvent budgets and reducing state budget deficits. 2, the system is manipulated to serve the needs of few and mislead voters. And 3, it serves the goals of the few and focuses political capital in the hands of corporations and special interest groups. In his first supporting claim that the initiative system limits the state from passing laws regarding budget, he brings up Prop 13 of 1978, which prevents the state from increasing property taxes above 1%. My counterclaim challenges his use of Prop 13. The 2008 field poll, which is a public opinion research organization, shows that if Prop 13 were to be voted on at that time, 2008, 57% of voters would be in favor and 23% would oppose it. Even Robbie says later in his speech that voters are against paying taxes to pay for the growing budget of the state, though with no citation. Although the proposition limits property and taxes from being raised, it does not seem appropriate to see the proposition as a detriment to the political system if the majority of voters still support it. As you can see in the poll, there's a 2-to-1 ratio in favor of Prop 13, even during the budget crisis. My claim is important in showing that limits to how much can be taxed is not necessarily a bad thing for the political system. If the majority of Californians do not want property taxes raised, then wouldn't it be in the best interest of the system to follow the needs of the many instead of the few? Speaking of the needs of the few, that leads to his second supporting claim, that the system is manipulated to serve the needs of the few and mislead voters. He talks about Prop 35, which was mentioned to be murky and misleading. He said in his speech that Prop 35 was entitled, "Stop Human Trafficking, Prevent the Sexual Exploitation of Children." When I looked up the official voter information guide website published by the California Secretary of State, the proposition is actually titled Human Trafficking, Penalties, Initiative Status. What he said it was entitled as was actually the first sentence under the first side of the argument. The problem that I see is that it makes Prop 35 appear to rewrite the bill to focus on sexual trafficking as opposed to other forms of trafficking. However, offenses and definitions of other forms of trafficking, such as labor trafficking, were already defined and accounted for in the penal code. For example, Prop 35 is merely an amendment to the code placing more punishment and defining new terms of trafficking. For example, Section 236.1F of the Penal Code reads, "Mistake of fact as to the age of a victim of human trafficking who is a minor at the time of the commission of the offense is not a defense to a criminal prosecution under this section." Before the amendment, mistaking a minor for being older was never an issue that was talked about. So this counterclaim is important because it shows that Prop 35 actually creates a broader definition of human trafficking and in turn applies to a larger group of Californians and protects a larger group of Californians. In fact, Prop 35 that Robbie used actually seems contrary to his counterclaim, his secondary claim that it's manipulative and serves the needs of the few. He also brings up that a bunch of people voted yes on Prop 8 because they wanted gay marriage. However, voting yes on Prop 8 was actually a vote against gay marriage. Proposition 8, if you look in Deborah Bowen's website, she's the California Secretary of State, the amendment is that only marriage between a man and woman is valid or recognized in California. Now, that seems pretty clear to me, and it's so explicitly stated and not murky or misleading like he claims. In fact, the proposition passed with a 52% majority vote, showing that the issue is not about the needs of a few if a majority of voters see other forms of marriage as not acceptable. It seems that rather the proposition is being, than the proposition being clear, it's the speaker who misunderstood the proposition, even though I don't necessarily agree with the proposition. In his third claim, he brings up Prop 17, which he describes as decreasing auto insurance prices, but in the long term, cut the amount of coverage for drivers with no citation. Sure, it's able to largely fund the bill, but when you look at the results, once again on Deborah Bowen's website, 51.9% voted no, which basically prevented the bill from being passed. However, my counterclaim is not all bills funded largely by corporations result in corporate selfishness. According to Julie Lynn of the Bloomberg Business Week, the LA Unified School District could cut its bill by 25% and an extra $28 million a year back into the classrooms affected by budget cuts. It was largely funded by a billionaire investor and philanthropist, Tom Steyer, and according to the California Official Voter Guide summary, Prop 39 requires multi-state businesses to pay income taxes based on a percentage of their sales in California and dedicates revenues for 5 years to clean, efficient energy projects. As a result, his Steyer's backing of the proposition helped eliminate the complex taxing of large businesses, but it also helps reduce energy costs that put a strain on the state budget. So as a result, my counterexample diminishes his claim by showing that it doesn't necessarily serve the goals of just corporations. So in conclusion, Robbie's reliance on propositions as grounds for his claims weakened his argument because he lacks citations, and even showing a misunderstanding of Prop 8 questions his credibility and understanding of his other claims. Thank you.
All right, I actually think that the claim is clearer after your preview than it was in the argument when we heard it the first time, so I thought you did a good job summarizing what the issues were supposed to be. And then on the individual points, you went right after the advocate's examples on that, so I thought there was good clash on the evidence that's being used and the way that the reasoning is going on. I thought that was especially effective on the Proposition 8 example that you used, where you gave us basically the wording of the proposition as it appeared under the Secretary of State's website that tells us this is what it said. And you said, well, I don't know what's ambiguous about this particular kind of thing. One of the things that you might do is also point out what the advocate's evidence talked about. Was there any evidence from the advocate that people were confused, or was it just his presupposition that they were confused because it was simply yes or no on gay marriage without any evidence indicating the opposite? And since it was widely, talked about and there were campaigns on it and all those kinds of things, the notion that people didn't know what they were voting for seems to be kind of ridiculous. And I thought that you made a very good argument on that point. The issue of what values we ought to be supporting on the first point, should we accept what the voters' limitations on those kinds of things. The advocate basically is kind of making this argument that says, look, voters want a lot and they don't want to pay for anything. I think that that's a reasonable issue to talk about. But for instance, Prop 13, I think your argument basically comes down to saying, look, voters still think that it's rather significant and important. What has been neglected here is why it was originally passed in the first place. And I think that a little historical context might have made some sense here, because the reason it was passing was because people were losing their homes because they couldn't afford the tax increases that were going on at the time because of the way housing prices went up. So people who had bought their houses for $35,000 and had mortgages that were consisted of, a few $100s a year were getting tax bills because the value of their house had gone up to 3 or 4 or 5 times what they paid for the house, were way disproportionate to what they could afford, and they were having to sell their houses. And that's a legitimate issue, a problem with the tax system that gets addressed by Proposition 13. And ignoring the context makes it sound like it's all just about keeping taxes low when there were other practical issues that were going on there. And I think that that's a legitimate point of those kinds of initiatives. I thought you did a very good job on everything, explaining all your concepts and trying to pick on the exact evidence that the advocate presented. All right, thank you.